Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 506 of Six Pixels of Separation, the Mirum Podcast. My name is Mitch Joel. It's Sunday, March 20th, 2016. Let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
I'm John C. Havens. That's my middle initial for Charles. I'm an author. I'm also a writer. I'm a contributing writer for Mashable, The Guardian, and Huffington Post, as well as a consultant.
John, I was trying to think back. We met, was it the first PodCamp? Is that where we met?
I'm pretty sure, and that was like Woodstock to me. I had so many people talk about Whitney Hoffman and Chris Brogan and all these
Christopher S.
people.
Penn and Julian Smith, and we could go on and on.
Yeah, I mean, just like a homecoming for. I just remember at the time I worked at About.com, and so I was covering it. But it was one of those rare events where you're like, there is something special happening here. And for me, it was sort of the birth of, at that time, new media and what became social media.
I often tell the story that, and I can't even remember the year, but it was a long time ago. I mean, we're talking, probably close to 10 years, maybe. I'm not sure, but I remember going to PodCamp Boston, the first one, and thinking to myself, like, boy, I'm really behind on this whole podcasting thing. I really got to step up my game. I mean, you think back to like how none of us, I think, really understood what the significance was of using this technology and this connectivity to create audio content and what we all wanted to do. And it really was like, it's sort of like if I think back to what I can imagine the world of pirate radio would have been, it feels like podcasting was sort of in that vein. And it's amazing to me to think also, like, you're right, it was a Woodstock moment because there were so many relationships that were created that to this day, there's sort of like the tentacles of which go back to that PodCamp. Even Jeff Pulver was there. I mean, it's pretty crazy to think about the Rocket Boom people back in the day.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day too. That I feel bad. I'm going to forget the name of the conference, the big podcasting conference that started. That was purchased by a different one. Anyway, when that first
that was like the New Media Expo or something like that, wasn't that? Are you talking?
Yeah. It was like the podcast and portable media expo first, and right. Being a consultant type, I've worked at large organizations too, but at the time I was a consultant, and I'm like, I'm going to pay the money and go to California. And it was like a geek camp, and I say that with like the highest praise possible. And it felt like that PodCamp Boston, like the same sort of 50 to 80 people. And I just fell in love with all these different people, and I knew everybody, like you and CC Chapman. I was like, these are people I know. And then like at South by Southwest, the first couple of years that I went to Interactive, because I've been there like 7 or 8 years now, it was similar. It was like the same sort of 90 or 100 people. And now, I'm sure you feel this way, you hear things like podcasting is finally taking off, and I'm like, it's been going since 2005, so it's great how it's evolved though.
I haven't stopped. You know that, right, John? Like I do an episode every single Sunday. I have not stopped. I've remained consistent since that time. It's and I do. It's one of those things where I take great joy in being able to watch not just the industry change, but the people that I've met change within that. Like I remember you really went full bore into the space. Like you were doing work at Blog Talk Radio for a while, weren't you?
Yeah, I was VP of Business Development at Blog Talk. Yep.
That's amazing. And so talk a little bit, because I want to really dive into the topic of your latest book, Heartificial Intelligence, because it's the content and the way you're approaching it is really in my wheelhouse of interest. And, I'm putting a little too much time spent in my life into that area. So I was really excited to see that you published a book. But the truth is, when I saw the book, I it took me a couple seconds to like catch the beat of that's the John Havens I know from podcasting. Like I had no idea that you had gone through, I guess, some form of business transformation for yourself. What got you to the place where now it's like full-time author? You've written 2 books. You wrote Hacking Happiness, which didn't come out all that long ago. Like you said, Mashable, Guardian, HuffPo. What was going on? Like what was that career trajectory component like for you?
Well, thank you for asking. I was at Blog Talk Radio and had a great experience there. and a friend of mine mentioned that she was looking for people to help her with social media at this big PR firm. And at the time, I was like, I have no experience in PR. She's like, look, and this is in like 2009. She's like, there are literally people here who don't even know what Twitter is, not how to use it. They don't know what it is. And she's like, come on in. So I started off as a VP in this top 10, at the time, a top 10 PR firm called Porter Novelli in New York. And largely because literally so many people in the space at the time didn't know about the tools, I was able to eventually be an EVP and got to work with all these people around the world. And that's where I also really delved into, with some big clients like P&G and HP, analytics, in the sense of, I wrote a book a couple years ago with Shel Holtz called Tactical Transparency, which was really sort of the sense of, all right, now that these tools are out there and people really have the opportunity, and this goes back to 2005, to speak their mind and have a voice, and kind of disrupting media so anybody can speak. Hey, guess what? We also really have to listen well. So brands really, and this is, of course, I'm speaking to you as the master here, but brands now, you can't just say stuff, you have to listen. And on a personal note, to now get to the point for this book, was also at the time that I left Porter, that my dad passed away. It's been about 4 years. And my dad was a psychiatrist. And largely just through kind of grief, and also wanted to honor who he was, I really became enamored with positive psychology, which is, I'm sure you've heard of things like mindfulness and altruism and stuff. But the real reason I became fascinated with it was I'm not as interested in mood, meaning my book, Hacking Happiness, understandably people would think it's about mood. It's really not. Positive psychology, one reason I love it so much is it's kind of like the gym. You go to the gym not because you necessarily are stoked, especially if you haven't been for a while, to go and work out. You need like a week or two to kind of get back into it. But once you do it, your physical well-being increases. Well, the science of positive psychology, because it's an empirical science for about the past 16, 17 years, meaning multiple global studies on it, shows that when you take actions for something like gratitude or mindfulness, that you can measure an increased well-being, which involves not really mood as much as a physiological sense of your well-being. So this is now, in my last book, you can wear quantified self tools or gadgets, as it were, to measure. Okay, I do something like I express gratitude, and my pulse rate diminishes. My sweat, that's measured by a watch or Apple Watch or whatever, shows that my stress is also diminishing. So it became very exciting for me because I was able to honor my dad, and still am, hopefully, by telling people not. And this is not to be negative to anybody who might have kind of a theory on how to be happy, but for me, I'm kind of like a optimistic pessimist, I guess, in the sense of like, I don't want to give someone a quick, a get happy quick scheme, because that's not the point. Introspection and positive psychology is work, but it's good work, and it's work to bring a sense of purpose. And then about two and a half years ago in my writing, I pitched a piece to Mashable about artificial intelligence, just because I saw so many articles that polarized, and this debate is still pretty much, in a lot of media, it's still the same way. Artificial intelligence is either the silver bullet that's going to cure the planet, or it's the robots that are going to kill us. And I thought, that doesn't seem the best way to move forward with this. And the whole book really became a journey to discover, are there any ethical standards about how to create this tech? And at the time when I started, and this is for your audience as well, ethics, I didn't necessarily care about them. I hear about things like ethics and standards, and like most people, you're like, hey, I'm going to watch paint dry, But when you start to realize what algorithms and AI is about, it literally, a lot of the field, and it's obviously a very big space and encompasses machine intelligence, cognitive computing, all these other fields. A lot of it is about devices or cookies online tracking us and watching us and creating, as it were, a methodology where, in one sense, they really are measuring our values. We would call them our actions, but the aggregate of our actions really starts to create a sense of who you are as a person. And so the new book, Heartificial Intelligence, the main message, and it's in the subtitle, Embracing Our Humanity to Maximize Machines, is like, look, there's not a whole lot more time left, and that's not really hyperbolic. Whereas individuals, as humans, we can sort of take a measure, literally, of our values in our lives so that we have a way to say, this is my subjective truth, and project that in code so that we can almost, in a sense, create our own personal algorithm so that when other algorithms that track us, etc., we have sort of a friend of mine, a guy named Yarno, calls us an algorithmic angel to take care of us.
So, there's a lot of stuff I want to push towards. So, Hacking Happiness came out, what year was it, 2014?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's pretty, so you're a fast click there, putting books out. So good on you for that. When I looked at Heartificial Intelligence, and I even think the copy, I'm probably like subliminally saying this back to you because I'm curious from the provocation, that the real sentiment of the book is be aware to the fact that algorithms currently probably know more about us than we know about ourselves. Now, I can say that and go, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. My running joke is that, Amazon knows more about me than my spouse does. It's like she'll complain like, I don't know what to buy you for your birthday, and yet every day I'll get an e-newsletter from Amazon with 15 things I actually really do want. Right? And there's that side to it, which we can both laugh at, and it gets a good laugh with the audience too. So I'm glad you're your standard audience for me, John. But on the other side of it, it can be terrifying because there's a sense of, I don't know what an algorithm is. I don't know what it's doing. And I think more importantly, I don't know what it's connecting to.
Yeah, I think and you're kind of explaining beautifully the whole kind of experience that I had through my book, which I'm hoping, as the book is written, the first half is dystopian on purpose. It's sort of like, here's all the top concerns that I've been thinking about, automation and work, and the second part is solutions oriented. It's by all means not in any way to say these are the solutions, but to try to move towards utopian. And that was because when I first did that first article on Mashable, and this is not a joke, I got really depressed because here's some facts, right? So the Amazon algorithm is one of a myriad. Dozens and dozens and dozens of other algorithms track both Mitch Joel and John Havens. And outside of, are there evil actors and is Facebook evil and all that? Like, let's put aside any of those moral distinctions and just point out that they all are built with a bias. Now, bias, it also may sound evil. No, it's not evil. But I have this joke, and of course you would know this with your expertise. There's no marketing funnel that ends in abstinence. And I say that as a joke, but when I worked with P&G and HP, I wasn't paid to provide senior strategic counsel and go into Gillette and be like, okay, here's a marketing funnel for how to get guys to be aware of the new Gillette razor and to use a new razor. And here, if they don't really like it, okay. Right? That never happened. So algorithms are designed to get you to take an action. Now, again, let's just say, because this is something you hear a lot, well, I love that. People will say, Amazon, for instance, and I get it. That algorithm helps me. It's my assistant. Well, here's the thing. The assistant is not, an assistant like for me as you, as a friend, right? Where I can say, hey, Mitch, I know you like this book, but have you tried this? And the assistant wants you to do something. So now the real point of the book is to say, when there's dozens and dozens and dozens of assistants, all of them invisible, each having you do different things, this does have a detrimental effect on our psyche, and that's full stop. And my dad was a psychiatrist. It's not the equal type of thing, but meaning apples to apples. But in my dad's line of work, that's called schizophrenia, right? Where there's voices that you're not sure are real or not, kind of getting you to do things. And once we start putting full-time Oculus Rift or Microsoft's HoloLens over our eyes and our ears, then quite literally the lens through which we see the world will now become the main conduit, whether it's, again, dozens and dozens of algorithms or kind of one master algorithm, and Oculus, of course, is owned by Facebook. Then that means the subjective person, who we are, turning off all the devices. And because right now, right, you turn off the computer, you put down your phone, and you're Mitch and I'm John. But I know
but
you're
not really. Not really, because that's like a very direct perspective. I think that there's the third party initiative that doesn't make that true, which is I can walk out of here without my iPhone, but 5 people want to take a picture, put on post on Facebook. Someone's doing a Snapchat. Something's caught overheard because somebody was Snapchatting while I was saying something privately to you. This, there is the ephemeral sort of us that exists without our knowledge of it digitally as well, which becomes algorithmic.
Oh, of course. No, and that's an excellent point. Is that I talk about? I think in Hacking Happiness, I mentioned this. There's an avataristic self, which especially folks like you and me that have been more into this space for years, we get, and I know you I haven't been there for a while. I went for a recent conference, but Second Life is so much fun and fascinating, and you get to create a whole new persona. You can be a woman if you're a guy. You can be a different color, all that. And in general, you and I, of course, are very used to, well, who am I trying to create my persona on LinkedIn and all that? But to your last point, how other people capture us and talk about us, that's a whole side of things. But in general, again, I'm just using this as an example because I know what you meant, but in general, we're sort of used to like, hey, someone said something about me on Twitter, et cetera. But even for those, I hate the term digital native, but people like you and me who are very used to this world, the algorithmic side of things is so complex and intricate. And also, as I talk about in this book and my last book, and this is mainly, I'll make it about the States, because I know with Canada and EU, I certainly want to honor the different amazing work that's been done in those spaces, which I think are at least 3 or 4 years ahead of the States in this side of things. I can't get, as an American, I can't get access to the data that is held about me from places, the big data broker houses, like an Axiom, the company. I literally can't legally find out what the data is that they hold. In the States, again, this is sort of the equivalent of where we were about 30 years ago with credit cards. You couldn't used to, in the States, pay an Experian to get a copy of your credit report. And now, as much as I have problems with aspects of the credit industry, it's, creditkarma.com, all these places you can find out, and this is a big part of the book, right? You can find out how the world rates you, positions you, and talks about. Now, granted, it's financially motivated, but also a core part of your identity. And that credit score is something that if you don't even have access to, then all these myriad of algorithms, how your data is sold, I give the analogy, and I'm not trying to exaggerate for effect, it is a form of human trafficking. It's just that the human trafficking is with a portion of your data, Mitch's data, that you didn't give permission to be sold or to have your name put on a list, so that now your subjective, who you say you are, especially once we put on all the gear in a couple of years, you may put on the gear and see 15, data doppelgangers, is a term a wonderful writer named Sarah Watson talked about, I think, in The Atlantic. And those, it's like evil Kirk and bad Kirk. I'm dating myself, right? And that's the terrifying part of it.
But and again, like I want to stay a bit dystopian because I think there's a perspective of recognition and knowledge that a lot of people don't have about this, right? They think it's, well, Amazon is, I'm picking on Amazon just because it's so large, but Amazon is following me and tracking me to make my experience better. And the better they make it, the more information I'm happy to share because there's a fair and equitable exchange of my usage in terms of then making what I see a whole lot better, right? Amazon sucks when you sign out and just go to Amazon.com. It's like just a big place with nothing to see. It's as it learns and goes that makes it more personable. But when I was reading through your book and self-reflecting on this space, and I think you and I are sort of philosophically very aligned with the questions we have, what it means to individuals, what it means to business, and then what's the sort of positive nature of it, because I think ultimately there is a positive force here that we'll get to. I was left thinking, okay, so John, you want to go and access this data and information. There are certain laws that happen within the country in which you live that preclude you from doing so. These are private organizations, whatever the legalese is or the control or lobbying that happens around that. The issue with the algorithm is that the algorithm isn't a company. The algorithm is this thing that is then being shared by multiples of multiples. Like you have no place to even go to ask to be rejected to find this information. And I was left thinking, as I was reading your work and then sort of reflecting on how I see it from a marketing, data, loyalty perspective, that my thing was, what happens when they learn enough? So now it's not even a question of, is there that transaction, or as you said, the funnel that ends in abstinence, but now it's beyond the fact that you transacted and bought something. Like you said, the information that's there could be that detrimental effect on your psyche because it actually really does see and know things you may not even know from your behavior. It's almost like when you look at your search archive, sometimes it's pretty astounding. And that's like just your search archive. That's nothing compared to it being able to pull big data information together and go, well, Mitch Joel is like person X or customer X. And this isn't about demographics and psychographics. This is like down into the deep stuff, right?
Yeah, and you bring up so many good things there. So I'll go at a couple levels. One thing in the book I mentioned, it's not Bruce Shiner. I'm blanking on the really popular blogger who wrote this fantastic post. Was Christmas season of 2014, and he wrote this post about inadvertent algorithmic cruelty. Great title. And what had happened is Facebook came out. Forgive me, you'll remember. I forget what it is, but this thing like year in review, where similar to the Amazon algorithm, meaning really trying to provide a good service. And I like Amazon's algorithm for myself, right?
Me too, yeah.
But I can comment on that in a second with another Amazon story. But in this case, Facebook, the goal of it, and let's just say that Zuckerberg and the folks there, this was really the goal, not about, scraping more data and getting you to buy stuff and killing the world. This was them saying, hey, 6 months ago, this is something really cool that happened in your year. Here's how to celebrate your year. So what happened with this guy is sadly, his young daughter, I think she was 8, had passed away during the year. And at the holiday season, Christmas, obviously a very tough time when you're dealing with grief, et cetera. The way that it was framed was like a sparkly picture with balloons and said, here's what happened in your year.
Right, I remember this story, yeah.
Got a lot of press, and there's no way that could have been perceived of like, hey, like it wasn't we're so sad about, our condolences. It was just a complete fail, right?
A glitch in the matrix.
A glitch in the matrix. Now, what his post, why it's so excellent, and I love referring to it in the book, is he didn't go off on the developers. He didn't say, that's why the title is so beautiful, inadvertent algorithmic cruelty. But there's another term I've been seeing a lot recently, which I love, which is well-intentioned technology or good-intentioned technology, which is the intention of those programmers was let's give people a real great look back on their year. But then what they didn't realize was, as he put it so beautifully, algorithms are heartless, mindless, and thoughtless.
But they're nuanced too. Like I would argue that, yeah, we're still at sort of point A of this. When this gets to point B and C, it's going to be able to stop that and go, that person died, shift. Like, you know what I mean? Like we're still in very early days when, what I consider to be the real big data engines kick in, which I don't think has happened really yet. It's going to be profound. I think it's going to be able to, you might have the glitches in the matrix, but I think that stuff will actually solve itself almost because it'll be able to look at the thing and go, actually, that person passed away. You know what I mean? Like things like that.
I agree, and that's the sort of next level is that I've been thinking about. There's two things. One is, and you touched on this earlier, I'm always amazed that like people don't realize. Like 4 years ago, I read some article. It wasn't DeepMind. It was another company like that. I'm blanking on the name. You might remember, but the government goes to this company. It's not just Axiom. It goes to this company for information about people. It's like the U.S. government, and they can predict with like an 89% accuracy. This was like 3 years ago. The actions that a majority of the people like you and me do, and when you have the same job, you live in the same place. Of course, we travel and all that stuff. But a lot of these predictive algorithms, to your point, they're improving to the point where I tell people, and again, this is not an exaggeration, especially when you start thinking of the Internet of Things, autonomous devices all around us, etc. Algorithms will certainly know us better than we know ourselves. And by the way, that also, it's not philosophical. It's, I don't remember what I did last week at 1:15, let alone what I did 7 years ago at 2:30 in the morning on April 15th or what I bought. So the real thing that I talk about in the book is sort of fighting for, first of all, is owning personal data. That's a big topic. Owning data is very hard, and that's a multi-layered conversation. Having a copy of your data where you get to say, this is me. This is how I'm projecting myself. And if you were able to have sort of an approved Mitch or John, this is like your LinkedIn, right? This is the approved LinkedIn, the approved Twitter. This is who I say I am. Now, does it mean you're not going to lie? No. Are you going to project your best self? Sure. But this is, again, I go back to the psychiatric side of things, where what I will say in terms of what I've seen a lot recently, and I'm working with a friend who's a doctor at Harvard on a great campaign called the Campaign to Change Direction, which is a woman named Barbara Van Dalen in the States is creating this to help people to remove the stigma around mental illness. Dealing with things like schizophrenia or depression. Another great example of this means well technology. There's a guy named Scott Smith who I interviewed for a Mashable piece that I did that comes out in about a week. He gave this great example. I forget the name of the nonprofit organization, right? So a nonprofit, ostensibly, obviously coming from a very good place, dealing with mental illness. They created an app, very smart in scope, that could recognize sentiment of people's tweets when they started to use words that would indicate that they were depressed.
Yeah, we've seen this. Yeah, there's a big study, and I saw this also in like MIT Review or something. I saw this as well.
Yeah, so this kind of blew up, and this is where now the ethics side of things, like there's a lot of stuff that's boring and hard and all that type of stuff, sure, but there's something called, it's not IRL, IRBs, internal review boards, where from an ethical standpoint, it's you get like 7 or 8 humans, maybe working with algorithms, that's great, or tech, but there's a sense of a framework of, okay, great idea. Look, first of all, the technology, awesome. Look at the level of accuracy. Maybe it's like a crimson hexagon, right? Like, holy crap! You're analyzing sentiment with irony and all this stuff. Fantastic. But then is to say, all right, now what are we going to do? Well, we're going to put this in Twitter. Okay, now that team, when you're trained in pragmatic application of ethics, that's not sort of like risk mitigation that lawyers do, which is at the end of an R&D or an innovation or a creation or a design cycle. I've been interviewing all these people, and I'm happy to give you all their names, and a lot of them are in the book, that pragmatic ethicists, I think, are going to be now working directly with like a CMO at that level. Because what that means is, at the front end of that situation with Twitter, a pragmatic ethicist would have been asking a lot of really tough and frankly annoying questions for the team creating that app and saying, well, wait a second, great idea, but have we thought about the ramifications of not just the initial nucleus of stakeholders, meaning the person who has the depression and tweets and the friend who means well and responds? What about the other layer of stakeholders, meaning the rest of Twitter, how they're going to react to the people who are depressed, and the analysts who could help that person being depressed? So the point is, you widen that lens from just what is the cool thing the tech can do, and the ethics is now really a sense of how do you protect the fragile, beautiful aspect of our human subjectivity. This is a huge question. Like here's the thing that threw me for a while. When I would write some stuff on Mashable, I wrote a piece and someone called me a fleshist. And I'm sure you know that term, right? Fleshist.
Define it, though, for people.
So if you are perceived by certain circles, and transhumanism, by the way, is a massive field and thought. So you can't say transhumanism and have it be one thing. It's like, there's so many different aspects to it. But transhumanism in a very broad scope means people who think that there's a way to continue life. It may be the singularity, meaning can we imbue our consciousness into a machine so I can be John after I die. It may be things like how do you replace a human eye with a machine, so you're kind of cyborging in, so there's that transhuman side of things. But some people, I would write pieces and they would get pissed because I was sort of talking about the beauty of humans without the technology. And fleshist is sort of a term calling me kind of a racist against this literal combining of humans and machines. And it really threw me because I thought, wow, I don't want to write in a sense that's sort of racist or and where people would interpret it that way. But I also found there's kind of a reverse side of things where, and I put this in the book, which is, if we want machines, if we want to eventually copy our consciousness, if that becomes possible, or machines become sentient, then a huge thing we have to do now is really be transparent in how, like, first of all, transparency in algorithms, transparency in the sense of half the world doesn't have access to a majority of these technologies. So when you hear certain people from Silicon Valley or kind of technological determinism, it really doesn't it just doesn't make sense because it's like, well, half the planet doesn't have this. And then also to recognize that if we don't say, I am John, this is my subjective truth, it's not about whether it's right or wrong. Because people will say, well, that machine, Google 2 days ago beat, DeepMind beat Go, right? The game Go. So now someone might say, well, that machine is better at playing Go or chess than a human. Well, we have to get to the point where we can say, look, better, first of all, is a kind of subjective term. But secondly, if that skill has been mastered by a machine, then where do humans still have value? And this is where saying things like, but humans will always have art and all that other stuff. And I can point to 10 companies creating AI or autonomous technology around art and all that stuff. Now we're talking preference. And I know you love jazz or bass guitar, right? So you could hear a bass guitar that's a human, and it's one of the best things you've heard in the world. And then you might go and hear a techno, whatever, bass player, and you're also genuinely viscerally moved. I'm not here to tell you in that situation how to feel, but I am here to say, look, we still have things as humans that are different than machines. It's not pejorative towards machines. But for instance, human well-being, our emotional intelligence, at least today, machines, and this goes like to the work of Sherry Turkle at MIT, and empathy and emotions.
Alone Together and end of conversation.
Oh, yeah. She's fantastic.
Amazing.
Her work shows, she's one of the most prominent in this space, that there is a vast cavernous difference between a human that can actually experience emotion and a machine that can emulate empathy. Now, emulating empathy is a great tool to help humans. So I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but recognizing that these things are different then allows us a way to say, how do we capture and protect this aspect of our human value so that when we put it into machines and they are assistants, we just don't fuck up around the things like the inadvertent cruelty, A, and then B, we still have a way, a sort of a personal cloud that we get to control and create our own algorithms. So in the midst of the swirling horde of a myriad of algorithms that are all bopping around Mitch, and I picture this like a beehive, right? The queen bee, as it were, is Mitch's protected, meaning a personal data cloud is the term, a peer-to-peer exchange of data. That cloud is where you get to say, well, fuck it, I'm still Mitch, and I get to be the person that says, I believe this, I think this. And by the way, I think the thing that's going to be more valuable to marketers than, again, at least in the States, the massive race to the bottom and commoditization of our psyches.
So if we think about, and we've used the word algorithm a lot, I think we use algorithm because as sophisticated as they are, they're actually a simplistic technology based off of the current state of what computers can do and how they can transmit zeros and ones. What is the tipping point for this clearly is going to be machine automation, AI, and machine learning, and there are many different words for this. We know that people are heavily vested in this. We know Google's vested in this. We know IBM's vested in this. We know Facebook is very heavily vested in this. And again, we'll switch gears from dystopian into opportunity and positivity in a bit, but still staying within the realm of that. I hazard to sort of take a deep breath and wonder what happens when these start going online and become what I would call commercialized. And what I mean by that is not just that they exist and they're being used currently in labs or on little projects, but that type of speed of computational power and learning is as standard as we all have computers and a network.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's very easy to stay dystopian because that's where we are. Like, you can call it dystopian, or like that's the depression I fought, is that dystopian sort of makes it feel like there's always going to be like a Blade Runner and there's something that's quote pure evil. Whereas a lot of the reason, and this gets solutions focused, but I'll stay with a dystopian, and this may seem like a out of nowhere comment, but GDP, gross domestic product, is the chief value that drives the planet since the late 1930s. And that's again, full stop, right? We can think of, well, no, values of goodness and kindness. No, I'm saying what you count, what you measure is what you count. And so Kuznets in the late 30s created this metric for measuring value, largely financial value. and said explicitly this is not to be used to measure a country's well-being or even actually all their financial value. Nonetheless, it is the primary measure that is still used today. Now, why is that relevant? Well, with automation, machine automation, and I get very tired of now what I think is a straight-up technological determinist rhetoric. I'm exhausted with it after 3 years in this space. Is when you think about, AI is happening, machine intelligence at whatever level, right? When the priority is to increase shareholder value for a quarterly mindset, then what you really are building automation for is as much productivity as possible while you diminish costs. So here's the thing, for Jeff Bezos and what he does, like for instance with Amazon and the warehouses, creating buying the, not Achieva, I forget the name of the company, the robots. These robots are phenomenal. And they do the work that humans, they can work 24 hours, you just have to have air conditioning. Once they get adjustable thumbs and they can stand on their tiptoes, there's no humans left in those warehouses. And I can lament, I'm the Luddite, wishing that warehouse working is not something that humans need to do anymore.
That's also the argument for autonomous vehicles, right? Like we can look at it in terms of cars and wouldn't it be great, but really where the value is we're talking about shipping, we're talking about containers and trucks, and when they can speak to one another and see things like storms and blizzards and divert and daisy chain against each other. And I've been in an autonomous vehicle, went for a ride on a physical road, early days of it, and you get out of that car and instead of thinking what you think would be like petrified, weird, you're like, okay, I don't ever want to get into a car with a human being again, because you realize that what it's seeing and doing and interacting with is actually way, way safer than the fallacy of humans, right? And that's the area where you talk a lot about sacrificing our humanity for productivity, and I think that there's something there. Obviously, it's a very hot topic and it's very, very relevant. But I look at it more from where you were just coming from, which is that there is components of automation that can make us better as people, with full acknowledgement that your skill sets may be the ones that are being highly disrupted. So yeah, I work in a warehouse. I'm not, that's my life, or I drive a truck and that's my life. And I'm not dismissing the value of it or the level of intelligence or the quality or importance of these skills. It's just that when you see something do it at scale in the way it can and what that can mean towards just quality of life, health, happiness, lowering of deaths, this isn't like, well, my computer is just a better calculator. You know what I mean? It's like, it is transformative.
Oh yeah, and cars are tough in the sense of I can't wait for autonomous cars. I wish they'd come sooner because I hate wasting time when I'm with my kids on like a long road trip or I'm sleepy. So cars are tough. I say tough in the sense of I would never argue against let's not have as many deaths, etc. But there's a great, phenomenal article to read in Medium by a guy named Scott Santens, Santens, who's the largest, one of the largest proponents of universal basic income. It's a brilliant article to talk about with one aspect of, for instance, like autonomous vehicles, because he talks specifically about the American trucking industry.
Right.
And most people focus, and I couldn't agree with you more, less deaths, less accidents, et cetera. Couldn't agree more. But what he talks about is he says, when you focus on one industry, we forget the ecosystem around that industry.
Sure, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
A. Now, B, the other thing is...
restaurants, gas stations,
food,
vehicle maintenance, road maintenance. So you go...
Exactly. Yeah. So now this is where when you have a metric... And I'll use the term, I think it's mainly in the States, there's a metric called the Genuine Progress Indicator. Because when you talk about gross national happiness, we'll get into comments about Bhutan, and they have slavery issues, and okay, fine. The Genuine Progress Indicator in the States, it's been adopted by 2 states, Maryland and Vermont, and it simply is taking the GDP metrics that still use them, right, because they're so embedded in everything we do, but it widens the scope and says, what is well-being? So let's just get that example with like autonomous cars. Will they lower deaths? I'm going to say yes, universally yes. Will it increase people's well-being because they're sitting in a car with their family? Yes, check. Okay, but now if you actually want to measure the aggregate side of well-being, that ecosystem from the truck trucker thing that I talked about, when people lose jobs, and this is mounds of quantitative data, not qualitative, quantitative data from places like Gallup, the depression rate soars. And the cost for depression is, in the States at least, the largest part of our healthcare costs. So emergency rooms, I think, or maybe the second. Emergency rooms are first. Depression-associated disease, right, is the number one. So here's the thing. It's very easy in one sense to say autonomous cars were going to wipe out death, which is true. Awesome. Thumbs up. But to not also have the scope of all so quickly such an ecosystem, meaning hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people are out of jobs, massive swaths of states, not just communities, states now lose their central ways of getting money, etc. And those healthcare costs are instant. They happen in months. And the thing about automation, too, that people forget is it's very easy to sector by sector, look at reports and go, well, this is a concern, this is not a concern. And one thing I talk about in the book is people from Google. This was in Bjornsson's Race with the Machines, I think. When they were developing autonomous cars like 10 years ago, the majority of the AI, or whatever they were calling it at the time, scientists, engineers leading in the world, were like, we will never have fully autonomous cars. Drive in a straight line? Sure. Drive and maybe take a right-hand turn? Sure. But there's this thing called the classic left-hand turn problem. And when you look to the left, there's like 7,000, whatever, tiny little things that can affect something that's very different from going straight or to the right. At that time, all the leading, and now this is in the story, so is it accurate? I'm saying that Bjornsson is pretty credible, They said no. All the science was like, we will never be able to battle this problem. And here we are today. Autonomous cars are here. So there's this, and then also I say, remember that it's very easy to think about autonomous cars when we think about automation and AI. But then, like I mentioned a minute ago, and you would know this, of course, Narrative Science, wonderful, really fascinating company. I've interviewed them, creating a technology to write news stories. Mm-hmm. And when you read them, and again, you point to this too, the improvement, how fast they're improving, it looks like a human could have written it. And it's your and my preference to say, well, I like the human writer better than the AI writer. I just added, by the way, because it's in the book too, my Mashable bio now actually says John C. Havens, human journalist. And I did that because I think it's going to be both colloquial eventually, and that it's going to be able to show that I am not biased by the algorithms that, for instance, with narrative science, they will be. Anyway, but the larger point I'm trying to make here is that there's so many areas, and we could go through verticals and jobs and skills, where there are multiple companies working to automate, whether it's art or music or anything. And in various pockets, I think what happens is we look at these reports about automation and we go, it's not going to happen to me or whatever. But in aggregate, the whole field is about replacing or replicating not just skills, but like aggregate skills. And this is where, by the way, the fundamental pinnacle of my book, the reason I looked for ethical guidelines in the creation of stuff, is I realized that ethical guidelines or standards is where we as humans go, wait a second. It doesn't, there are going to come points where it's like, it's a spreadsheet issue, right? If we can automate the entire planet out of, let me just call it bullshit work or bullshit labor or things like cars, where no one's going to say, well, I want to get back to driving, because they won't. But if we also say, now we think about all these other factors that may be sort of invisible. And again, people are going to continue to aggressively automate because they can, because the primary value that's measured and that they're rewarded for is increased productivity because of GDP. And that means that this is the final, if we're going to move to utopian stuff, the dystopian is, that's just a fact. And you can watch from 2 weeks ago, I can't tell you how many World Economic Forum talks I saw at Davos that I just was like yelling at, because you see people talking about there's $16 trillion of GDP that's going to be increased with AI. These bland rhetorical statements that mean nothing in the sense of, great, you're going to create AI for who? the companies making the devices. And now, by the way, are they creating value for the people using them? Sure. But what that value is, and again, all the stakeholders involved, they may be helping the customers, but the employees, that those skills are being watched. And this is something Martin Ford has a great book about Rise of the Robots. Fantastic book.
Great book.
He's like, look, if you're at a company and there's an AI system, maybe it's very young, watching you, as it were, you can assume that it's training for your job and you're going to be out of a job. There are very few professions left where that isn't happening in one way or the other. And again, this is something people are like, well, that happened with the Industrial Revolution. It happened in a certain sector, agriculturally largely. Now it is in every sector. And again, the primary reward is in every sector, automate faster, make more money.
All right, John. So other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you like the show? All right. I mean, like, so let's talk about the positivity around the future and technology. Is this the first bridge is actually how do we control our identity? How do we own our data, which you've already stated is very hard. What is the flip side to this? We become Star Trek and everybody just pursues their interest and all else is taken care of? What are we looking at?
Well, I think when in the second part of the book, I created a survey with a friend who's a PhD in positive psychology. It's very simple, and it's based on a buddy of mine named Konstantin, who is a quantified self hero of mine. And one day I was chatting with him, and I was like, so what work are you doing? He's like, well, I tracked my values this month. And I was like, what does that mean? And he had taken a list, a famous psychologist named Schwartz, and there's a list of 10, we made it 12 for our survey, of values. And in this case, it wasn't things like integrity. It was values like family, health, etc., education, kind of very general words. And he said, I created a list of what, before I started tracking for the month, what values were most important to me. And then 2 or 3 times a day, I just did a sort of check and said, am I living to these values? And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, being with my partner is really important to me. So I put that under family. And I said family on a scale of 1 to 10 was a 9. And by the end of the month, I realized I didn't spend as much time with him as I wanted. And so that the number, and he's much more mathematical and he's a genius. And he's like, it was like a 6. And so with his permission, and we give him full credit because he really gave me the idea, we're working on an app, but in the book it's just a very simple paper survey where we took there's 12 factors and we said, look, take a measure of your values. Because at least for myself, I wouldn't, if you asked me what my top 4 values were, I'd be like, all right, my faith, my work, my kids, Nutella. I like to swim. It just got sort of vague. And then the reason that I bring that up is
I don't think Nutella's a value. In case we're
all right, well, fair enough.
It is for me.
It is for me. After I tracked my values meaning at the end of every day, I just went back and with this list of 12 things, I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, did I live to this today? So family is very easy. Was I not with my family or my kids because I was traveling? Then it's a 0. So the point was, at the end of like a month, I had a real gift for myself of these insights of saying, well, my perception of my values and what I'm living to, there's some discrepancies. And this, by the way, is very similar to work like Gallup Strengths Finders, where you start to realize if I'm relying on other people to sort of make me happy, but I don't really understand even what I value and if I'm living to it. There's a lot of research with positive psychology saying if you don't live to your values every day, your well-being diminishes. Well, then you have to know what they are. And the reason that's also important is in the field of AI, and I use it, again, AI is a very broad term, but there's a great guy named Stuart Russell. He's one of the real thought leaders in AI based out of the UK. I won't get into all the geekery, but he uses a type of methodology called inverse reinforcement learning, or IRL, in AI. And there's a massive number of people in AI who are literally trying to imbue human values into machines, whether it be robots, because robots are just the exterior, like the Android exterior, or into algorithms. So what that means is, like the movie Chappie, literally, these engineers, scientists, etc., developers will be saying, how do we have this value, whether it's an esoteric value, whether it's integrity, whatever, how do we kind of walk the pony back and create an algorithm that then when I put that into, say, a robot, and it becomes like a Jibo and it's a companion robot in someone's house, it will look to be the value of that human. So
empathetic,
empathetic,
understanding.
whatever it is, right? And so another key part of the book that I point out is like, look, there's a pretty short window. I think maybe 5 years, 10 years, whatever, 20, like putting into semantics, that's a good discussion. But for right now, let's just say what I feel is a fact, especially once we put the stuff over our eyes and ears like with an Oculus. There's a finite amount of time where we will be able to look at our subjective selves, where we still have the opportunity to even kind of turn everything off. Like your point before, we can't turn off people writing about us and all that. But the Internet of Things, right, there's still a window where we can go in a room, go out into the wilderness, and say, who the hell is John? What do I think my values are? Does it mean you're going to be right or they don't change? Of course not. But it's your subjective truth. If we don't have time to say this is my subjective truth, and I use the term value as I explained it just now to say that, then when all these other algorithms come and kind of start to change our awareness of who we are, we don't have a level set. We don't have that alpha place where we can say, but this is me. So are you going to change? Sure. Just like you change when you, Mitch, we finish our interview and you go talk to a friend at work. You're going to change. But the point is that you still are going there saying, well, I am Mitch, as compared to that will not be the case pretty soon.
So what you're saying is that the non-dystopian future is a place where individuals have some level of self-awareness and that they can create something that is, let's call it an anchor in their lives, where that is the anchor. It's the place where they drop anchor. They know that that's who they are. So that sounds really great for like you and I, because maybe we do some work on ourselves and we actually think about things like positive psychology and how can I be better and mindfulness, etc. But let's face it, that's not going to permeate down to the masses. We've got people now who aren't even smart enough to know that as they complain about privacy, they're busy posting pictures of their kids on Twitter.
No, and you know, in terms of like a wicked problem, you know, multifaceted.
This is it.
This is it. But I think that's also where I'm actually I'm doing some different work right now. In fact, with a large engineering-based organization, a global engineering organization, to create a code of ethics. We're part of the code of ethics, and by the way, it's not about telling people what they should think. Codes of ethics are more ways to say, how do you frame this discussion so that people still have a choice to make their own morally based decisions, right?
Right.
But I think this is where marketers, I keep telling my marketing friends, and I used to work in PR, so that's me too. I'm a marketer, I'm a consultant, right? Is think about this. If it's true that, at least theoretically, it's going to be 4 or 5 years where, and again, in the States at least, advertising, CPMs and all that reflect this. It's a race to the bottom in the sense of, you're either going to track people to the point that they're freaked out, or they know that you're tracking them even if it gets invisible. They're going to not appreciate the way that you do stuff, and that reminds me, I can tell you an Amazon story in a second about that. So it's probably clandestine. If the right companies, and I know friends at Cisco, IBM, like there's some big companies that are doing this, they're not going to go to, as you point out, like kind of the average person, and I say that with love, but to your point, like they're not going to the average person to be like, hey, do you want a peer-to-peer encrypted personal cloud that's going to store your data and your sense of subjective reality, right? They're going to be,
when you go to figure out their basic cable subscription, you know, yeah.
Well, but here's the thing, they go to the bank, right? There's an incentive for businesses, and again, in the EU, especially in the financial world, and it's not just Bitcoin, there's the insurance world, et cetera, there's a massive opportunity people are realizing, not just to build trust and like hands around the world and kumbaya and all that, to say, look, if consumers on whatever level get really pissed, and they're doing what, I mean, you know all these reports that are out right now. People lie, right? They give the wrong email address. They give the wrong whatever. A lot of the data is just erroneous because people are lying about themselves. And this is not avatar stuff. This is, I'm distrustful of the system, so fuck you, and I'm going to say I have a different email. So there's that side of things. If as a bank or an insurance company, you come up with something, and it's going to be some fun name that just says, hey, listen, when you go online, instead of just the encrypted way to check your account, we've created what's called, and I like this term at least in general, a lot of companies, there's a whole ecosystem around Doc Searls's The Intention Economy, this mindset of what's called personal information management, or PIM. And by the way, for your listeners, there's a great company in the UK called Control Shift. You would love that in that sense. Control CTRL. That does amazing research in this space. And what that means is the cell there, as it were, is not going to be all the data terms. You probably know the company Personal.com. I've written about them for years. Wonderful work. And the first thing they did, which really got them, was a service that people really loved, is it's a service called Fill It. I forget how they spell it. But the service there was to say, look, hey, and there's been now multiple people copying this idea. John and Mitch, the world hates entering in 7,000 different passwords for 7,000 different sites. So they said, we will create, and can it be broken and hacked? Yes, but I'm just saying this is the logic. I mean, not theirs. I just mean, can this type of thing be hacked? Is that you create your master password, and then anytime you go to a site, you press a button, and automatically, takes a couple days to generate it, but the point is that anytime you go to another site, it automatically populates all these different passwords, and it saves time. And so the easy sell there in one sense is that people don't know it's personal data and all that. They just know, oh, great, I'm saving probably at minimal 4 hours a week because I'm only entering one password to one company. I trust them. They've encrypted, et cetera. Anyway, so that same logic, if now we start to tell people, and I give the example of a dating site. I think it's OkCupid, one of them. You enter in something like 400 pieces of data about yourself before you go on a date. And obviously you're very incentivized because you want to have a good date or maybe meet a partner. That's very much, obviously, you are saying these are my values at a hyper intimate level, right? If that same logic, because if someone can create whatever they call it, a personal values database or some consumer-friendly term, and I think, by the way, Cisco, a bank, an insurance company, they're going to call it their thing. But if they're really smart, they're not going to try to target it as just, this is the Cisco thing. They're going to say, this is a platform that Cisco is using. So any of Cisco's Internet of Things or whatever data can go through this. But hey, Mitch, this is for you to do two things. One, sort your life in data. And all that means is, well, this is about me and my kids. This is about me and my dating life. This is about me and education, whatever. And then you get to set the general Uber preferences for how you'd like your data to be used for any device. So, okay, you're really privacy sensitive because that's a preference. Okay, then you don't want anybody to access any of your data at any time without being alerted. Now, of course, you walk out in the public and you'll get 400 messages in a minute. Okay, so you change your settings. But now that personal algorithm becomes now you saying, well, this is the Mitch, certified personal algorithm. And in terms of your data, now what this means is your data is no longer a commodity, right? That is something that, and this is where I want mainly the third-party data brokers to quake in their boots, because that's, if there's any, quote, evil, it's clandestine. It is not, there's multiple in the States, millions and billions of dollars spent for people going to the Hill and changing, trying to keep policy from changing that exposure. If I'm allowed to start to project, and we as consumers are allowed to say, hey, this is actually me, I think that gives brands multiple opportunities, first of all, to stay around, because once you get the tracking algorithms that do a better job than they do of understanding their consumer, that means that diminishes them. And secondly is now there's a whole new opportunity to sort of rediscover who people are saying they are with their algorithmic. Again, this guy Yarno, I think his last name is Capel, he wrote for TechCrunch, beautiful term, algorithmic angel. This angel functions, it goes in front of you, and it provides, and there's a lot of talk of this type of thing in the business world, it goes ahead of you and your data to protect against negative actors and hackers. But then it also goes ahead of you to sort of say, hey, this is who John says he is in a codific level. So brands, it doesn't make a difference if he actually, you have the data that says he's lying, right? Okay, but this is what he says. Are you going to do a better job selling to him by embarrassing him or saying whatever because you're targeting, right? Like, because also I'm being callous or whatever to be funny, but like porn, right? Are we going to start to factor what people really do with certain aspects of their online life and sell to that? Or are brands going to go, well, that's sort of the hidden life that we never, whatever, we're not going to focus on. Who does John say he is, and how can I sell to that? And that means my algorithm's going to develop the algorithm that a brand that I trust it's going to be back to sort of square one of you prove value to me, I give value to you. But again, the biggest thing is people think that they don't have the ability or the right to start saying, no, this is my data and it's not a commodity. It represents my identity. Fuck you all. This is mine. And are you going to own it? No, you're not. But are you going to be able to say and point to, but this was me, and be able to track it and kill your data? Yes, that's technologically possible, and that's what I've been evangelizing for about the past 3 years.
It's amazing. I think, we've been doing this for almost an hour, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface, and there's just a ton of very interesting provocations and questions that you bring forward in Heartificial Intelligence. I'm going to urge everybody to check it out. John, it was so great to catch up with you. Let people know where they can best connect with you online.
Well, first, Mitch, such an honor, and thank you so much for letting me get all soapboxy with you. It's a real honor. My website is my name, which is John C. Havens, and that's JohnChavens.com. I'm John C. Havens on Twitter, and the book's available on Amazon and all the places books are normally sold.